whatever learning curves that you need to go through, and we're all on a learning curve, what makes someone successful at what they do is the speed at which they go through that learning curve. The mentality that I have, particularly working here as an example for more than a year, is how do I speed it up? How do I speed up the learning curve? And you only do that by truly scrutinizing, okay, where am I making mistakes and what do I need to learn from them? You're invariably going to make some mistakes. That is the growth mindset. You're never, you never stop learning, for me, until the day you die, to be honest.
In today's episode, I've got the honour of speaking to Pete Wickersham, a Vice President and General Manager of a UK Pharma affiliate with a team of more than 200 employees. We discuss the arc of professional development, the nature of leadership, and the existential challenge of charting a meaningful career path in a time of relentless change. Pete brings over 25 years of industry experience, and what emerges from our conversation is a compelling union of both insight and humility. The importance of asking the right questions rather than providing all the answers, the necessity of giving up expertise to lead effectively, and the moral obligation to be someone who shows up for your team, for your principles, and for your commitments. We also explore the discomfort and growth that accompany career transitions, the evolving role of higher education in the age of AI, and the value of making mistakes, not as failures, but as catalysts for accelerated learning. And perhaps most critically, we discuss the mindset required to navigate it all. A commitment to learning, to responsibility, and to the development of competence over time. This is a conversation for those striving to do more than merely succeed. It's for those who aim to lead with integrity, to grow despite uncertainty, and to become the kind of person others can rely on. I really hope you enjoy this episode. So, thanks for coming, I guess.
Good to see you, Mirko.
Good to see you, Peter. Peter, I say Peter. Pete, everyone calls you Pete.
That's fine. Either's fine.
Perfect. So I'm here with Peter Wickersham. I've done some digging. Should I call it digging? I stalked you on LinkedIn, basically. That's what I did. So I just wanted to break into your background a little bit. Sure. So for everyone who's viewing, watching, listening, you're a Vice President and General Manager of a UK affiliate, Pharma affiliate, and you've got a background in applied statistics, and you also got an MSc in technology management, which I'm not really sure what that is, so you need to explain a little bit. Sure. But I mean, this is a new format. What I like to do with this is just basically get an intimate discussion. Speak to people in the industry, speak to people who are senior leaders who've got lots of experience, lots of things to share, and I just want to make sure to create a format where that experience is then broadcasted out and available to broader public.
I think it's a great idea.
Perfect. And thanks so much for joining. I really appreciate it. So I've got lots of questions. I think there's various directions we can go, but I think for today what I'd like to do is I'd like to focus it on two main aspects. So the one being sort of like a leadership discussion around what's your approach to leadership, given that you've already been in the industry for close to 30 years, I think it is. Maybe not quite as long, but
maybe closer to 25 than 30. We'll see.
25,
depending upon how we're measuring it. Yeah.
We're calling it that. Okay. No, but I think that's obviously a wealth of experience, and sure. I'm sure there's lots of lessons to be learned from that. And then also, what's sort of your advice to people about development, people who want to break into the industry, maybe people who are already in the industry. What can they do to improve on their career, to just to give some general direction, because I think right now everything can feel very uncertain. I think it's certainly times where things seem to be shifting, things are moving around, AI obviously being a big topic, lots of jobs being replaced by AI. I mean, we've heard the announcement from Microsoft not too long ago, laying off lots of people. So that's sort of like the framework for our discussion. But I think I just wanted to start with an opportunity, or give you an opportunity to basically lay out your career pathway, the 25 years, as we've called it. What's been your journey? What's your journey been like? Like, where did you start, and how did you get here to become general manager of a UK affiliate?
How much time do we have? Everyone has their own unique journey, right? And so everyone has their own unique story to tell. I guess the easiest way to describe it was, growing up in school, I was a little bit more slanted towards math and science than the humanities. Right. And I think that's just naturally how I developed. Interestingly, later on, it balanced out. And so it much more even down to like testing scores, if you will, as I was trying to get into graduate school. I found my scores evening out, which was fascinating to see. But early on, it was all about math and science for me. And so, I went through university in a very science-focused type of degree. Leaving university, trying to figure out, okay, how do I start this? Where do I jump off, if you will? And so elected to do a postgraduate degree. It was intended to be medical physics. And so that's the nuclear science and engineering degree that you might see. It was intended to be, physicists that help with respect to radiation oncology, getting the right dose of radiation to the right part of the body and the right, amounts. And so I was going to do that and then decide whether I wanted to continue on going to medical school or do something else. In doing so, I had to take some stats courses or some statistics courses. And then that's what then became kind of a dual master's degree type of approach. And in doing that, then I found the pharmaceutical and biotech industry in terms of we had someone come in who said, hey, you could help us design and analyze clinical trials for new medicines. And I was like, that sounds really interesting. And so it literally was just a form of discovery going through that at that moment in time. And it kind of connects to broader advice to young professionals, if you will, is to me the most important aspect kind of coming out of school and then in your 20s or in the early part of your career is to find in that what's that entry point that most suits you.
Yeah.
Right. And so is it health economics? Is it biostatistics? What is it? Right. Because once you're in the industry, then your curiosity and your performance can take you many different ways, as it did with me, right? But finding that appropriate jump-off point, I think, or entry point, is really important.
But I think just jumping in on that, because I feel like that's the thing that lots of people are struggling with. Like, how do I identify what's right for me, right? Because I think, especially nowadays, it feels like there's so many options out there. We live in this globalized, crazy world where opportunity is everywhere, at least seemingly, and that can be very overwhelming. Like, how do you narrow it down to then find what's right for you? Where does that start?
Yeah, I think it's like anything, right? You have to assess what your strengths are at that moment that you're trying to make those critical decisions in terms of what you're going to study, and then from there, that's what helps determine where you go in, right? So, if you don't study pharmacy, or if you're not a clinician, it's hard to go into medical affairs, in the pharmaceutical industry, right? And so you have to decide, if you will, in terms of at least what's going to be the general direction that you want to pursue. Great example is if you're very much into digital media, or if you're very much into comms or public affairs, then a communications degree focused on new media, is your discipline, and then that's your jumping off point. You might get into industry after that and then decide, hey, I'd rather go focus here or focus there. But that initial push in terms of what you decide to study and then focus is important for the entry point. After that, then to me, I'm a big believer in growth mindset, continuous learning. And my career's a great example of that. Your path can vary from there, and it should. And that's what makes it fun, right? To different areas or spaces. But you're talking about the first point, which to me is a critical moment to decide, okay, where is it that I at least want to specialize for my first go, if you will.
Yeah. And I think, at least to me, a lot of that just comes down to just making the decision in many ways. Because it's like, when I look back at like my career journey, so much of it just feels so random in a way. It's like, at some point, I attended this event where it was like all about this new master's program that they were setting up back then. It was like healthcare management. I thought that sounded very interesting. I was like, oh yeah, okay, so I'm going to sign up for that, right? And that just then from there, kind of like everything else was a follow up basically. So
that's exactly it, right? And I'm a bit older, right? I have a university age son and daughter right now. They're going through this at this very moment, right? And in fact, my son had a decision to make in terms of, do I slightly alter my path or not? He studies engineering, and so he had to make a big decision, and I watched him struggle with that decision. But I considered he struggled in a good way, right? I mean, he was really weighing the pros and cons of each, and then he made the best decision he could. But at one moment, and it took him a good, I don't know, say month to make this decision. At one moment, he realized, I just have to decide now and move on, right? And that's life. You make the best decision you can. You learn from those decisions. Sometimes you find that there's an element of regret in decisions. That's happened maybe once or twice, but generally not. Generally, if you put in the time to framing the decision in the right way and doing the best that you can, you just move on and you do great things. And it's funny, it all kind of works out in the end if you do, right?
Even if you're not necessarily like happy sometimes with the outcome that you get, I think you can still look back at some decisions that you made in the past and then think, oh yeah, given the information I had back then, it was still the right choice for me.
Exactly, right? And so, and the good news is that I don't think anyone's going to have just one career, right? I mean, and you know what? There's some, my father-in-law is a great example. He effectively had one career. He had two, one in academia and one in industry. But, he was an industrial organic chemist, and he was world-class, right, in that. And he developed himself, and that was what was most important to him over the course of his career. There are some people like that who pick a discipline and then stay with that discipline and develop within that discipline for their entire career. I have much respect for those people. But I would say for the majority of people, you're going to have not one, but several careers over the course. And so if you don't get it exactly the way you want it right out of the gate, that's okay, right? You'll have another chance, and the world around you, the environment around you will evolve, and you'll evolve with it, right? And so that's what makes it a whole lot of fun and satisfying over a longer period of time.
Absolutely. Just because you've mentioned your son just going through that like choice of like, what does he want to study just recently, I'm just like, I've got a question more related to like the broader like system of like how do we, like, what do we want to get out of education? I think that's currently a bit of a debate, like what's the value of like a university degree, let's say, that's going to take you, I don't know, if you're doing a bachelor's, at least 3 years. If you're doing a master's on top, that's, at least 1 more year, maybe 2. So you're spending, maybe up to like 5 years if you're doing PhD, even longer. Is there still lots of value in doing that, or is there a bit of a shift, especially like with AI, sort of like it feels like we're on the brink of things shifting towards, like we've got intelligence now right at our fingertips with access through our phones, on our computers. Like what's the role of university education? How do you see that going forward in an age where AI is just becoming more and more prevalent? Like what do we make of this?
I mean, it's an interesting question. I am certainly not the expert, right, with respect to that. I guess I'll just say some observations, right? So I clearly, I have the advantage that I went through a science degree, a math / technical analytical degree, and a business degree, that was crossed with technology. And watching those from afar now, in terms of how they're evolving their curriculum, right? Seeing what's coming out of the university and universities that I went to in the United States as an example, is fascinating to see how they're adjusting their approach, their curriculum. Every university is trying to keep its relevance to how the world is shifting around us, right? And so to watch the curriculum change, to watch the topics change, I think it's fascinating to see. And so, we're just like any other consumer. You're going for an education, you're a consumer of that education. Be really a really informed consumer, right? In terms of what you're seeking and what that university is seeking to educate you about. I think that's probably the most important thing to stay attuned to. I'll stay away from the broader question of, do university degrees even matter anymore? Yeah. I don't know, right? But the only thing I would say on that front is, there are highly technical degrees where I think invariably it does matter, right? It does matter getting those, highly technical degrees. You're just not going to walk out of an undergraduate degree and go design the next chip for NVIDIA to serve the AI boom that's occurring globally. It's just not going to happen, right? And so certain engineers are going to have to require, extra training, of course. I do believe, if you have a science background and you haven't had much exposure to business and you seek to be a general manager or some sort of generalized business, leader, I do think that type of education is important, and those degrees exist for that purpose. And so, Masters of Business Administration or MBAs, are useful in that sense, particularly if you're transitioning from one discipline to another. So that was useful for me when I, at the right time, the reason why I did this master's in technology management, it was essentially, it was at the University of Pennsylvania in the U.S., and it's essentially like Wharton business courses and engineering courses combined, right? And so you what that gave me was the most recent engineering and tech courses that you could get at the time. I know it's 20 years ago now, right? But at the time it was really useful and elucidating, and of course you just continuously learn after that. But then it also paired that with, I sat in my first marketing course, sat in my first finance course, accounting course, and so forth. And so that was super helpful to me to kind of expand, okay, all this analytics that I had done in the past, it can be applied in the business setting. How would that be, right? And so from that standpoint, it was invaluable to me.
I see. And when you speak about those skills that you've developed at university with those degrees that you've got, how has it? I'm assuming there must have been a shift towards how you've applied those skills in your work as you progressed throughout the various stages of your career. What was that evolvement like compared to, I don't know, 15 years ago, 20 years ago? I would imagine you would have applied very different, a very different skill set as opposed to what sort of skills you're using now. Or is that not the case?
No, it's totally the case. It's very observant. And so you're right, there is an evolution as you go through that. So the way I describe it is when you first come out of university, or when you're first starting in your career, you are the subject matter expert that is doing the work, right? I mean, you really, whether it's preparing, for a health tech assessment, or preparing a marketing campaign, right? Or, preparing to discuss something with a healthcare professional, right? So you're really focused on specific areas. Over time, you become, and you have to be comfortable with this, you become less the subject matter domain expert and more of a generalist. You have to give up some of that expertise in order to be able to see a bit of a larger, ecosystem type of picture. That can be very uncomforting. It can absolutely be, right? Because you have to become comfortable not being the smartest person in the room, right? So I know that when I enter a room now, there are people in that room that are going to know the topic more than I do, right? And so you just have to be comfortable with that. But then you apply certain skills that help to shape the discussion. To me, the most important thing that you can do as you get further and further in your career is ask the right questions.
Okay, that's interesting.
That is to me by far the most important thing. Is to be able to ask astute questions, to try to get at the core of it, while not being the expert.
And how do you do it? Because I think that's super interesting. Like, I think just on the surface, it seems like an obvious thing to say, right? Like, ask the right questions. But like, how do you actually do that? How do you know what the right questions are, considering that you're removed from the actual like technicality of like an HDA assessment or whatever it is that you're currently working on? How do you then ask the right questions? Do you have like a framework, or
that's the art, of being a good leader or general manager? I think the first thing is seek to understand first. That to me is always the most important thing. And I've been told over the course, going back, 10, 15 years now, that I ask a lot of questions, right? And so, it's been a thing, right? I think it's helped over the course of time, but you seek to learn, you seek to understand. For me, that always involves, how can I prepare for the discussion? So I'm known to like a good pre-read, as you well know, right? And so that is part of the journey. That's part of the path, is to first read, to first understand, what you can. Go into the conversation knowing a bit more than you might otherwise know when you enter that conversation. And then I think the process, at least mentally, that I go through is I'm just trying to formulate the context and the problem at hand. Like, okay, so why are we here? Like, what are some of what are we seeking to achieve, and what's the context around that? And what are some of the extenuating factors or things that are shaping that? To me, that's where the questions come in. Like, so is this what's driving it, or is that what's driving it, right? Do we want to be in a position where we're landing here, or do we want to be in a position maybe where we're landing there? And I may not know which one of those two are, but the team will, right? The team will be like, no, Pete, we want to be there, right? I'll be like, right, okay, perfect. So then if we want to be there, then where are we here, right? And then you just kind of find your way through it. So it's a balance of those things. With highly technical things like the things that you do, there is a seek to understand moment, right? And we've had those discussions, right? Where I'm saying, okay, how does this work? How does that work? Okay, I get it, right? And I think that is, that type of learning agility maybe is the right term. You just have to try to continually cultivate a curious mindset. It takes humility. It takes humility to not be the smartest. There was a time when I valued being the smartest person in the room. Right? You just don't anymore, right? You just kind of give that up for the benefit of everything else, right? And it's actually really gratifying, because then the diverse set of views that you have that are in the room, that your goal as a leader is to try to draw those out, right? And some people openly give them, and others you have to kind of pull them out. Yeah. Exactly, right? And so then once you get all those out, then you realize that you're getting the most out. And so that's a plug for having diverse teams. It's a plug for having diverse perspectives, in the room. It's only through those things that you can then, to me, get at the context, get at where you want to be, and then try to shape a common, future, if you will, or wherever you're trying to go.
Yeah. So just what I took away from that, I think kind of like 3 points. One being just ask more questions, right? The more you ask, the more opportunities you get to like pull out the right information. Mm-hmm. So that will be one. The second one, the bit about being prepared, going into it, having a pre-read, like being informed about the situation.
Or doing a little research.
Do your own research.
Exactly.
And I think Amazon is also famous for that, like completely banning like all slides in their company and just like
come in and read the brief.
Exactly. So like making sure everyone's aware, because I think oftentimes that's just not the case, right? People go into a meeting, they're missing the broader context. So I think that's the second point. And then thirdly, just that humility piece. Like how do you remove your ego? How do you, like throw it all aside? You don't need to be the smartest person in the room. exactly like the opposite is kind of what you want. You want other people to be smarter than you so that you can then pull from their sort of like experience background. That's great. I think just like shifting tone a bit maybe, or like more diving more into that leadership component, because we've talked about like how your leadership has, or the skills that you apply during your work, have kind of like varied over the course of your career. But I'm curious as to like how you spend and like manage and prioritize your time right now. I must assume there's like so many conflicts, like so many like things you could be like putting your attention to, so many important critical issues to look out for. How do you then decide like I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this? Like a bit about like, yeah, tell me a bit about like how do you manage your time and like what to like focus on?
So it's a great question, and I see some people do it well, and I see some people who I go, okay, they look like they're being controlled by their own diary or being controlled by their own calendar, right? And so, for me, my methodology is at the foundational piece, you have to just find out what's the most important priority or priorities that you have, right? And so it sounds so very simple, but then it becomes a time allocation problem, for me. And so it's, okay, so how much time am I spending on this versus that? Is that the right mix? Is it not? And so I try to identify what those big things are. Some call them the big rocks, if you will, if you've seen that,
I've not heard
before.
That,
oh, it's it's this model that, if you want to fill as much as you can into a particular jar, and you want to prioritize those items, you put the big rocks in, and then you fill the sand in around that. And by doing that, you can achieve the most, prioritize the most volume as well, in that. And so I had a mentor and a colleague, that was her, methodology, if you will. So it naturally rubs off. But I think identifying what those top priorities are important. And so, and frankly, sometimes they work out as you expected them to be, and sometimes they don't, right? And so, as an example, coming here to the UK, I had a mental image in terms of how much time I would spend externally on more macro government or environment type of issues, and it turned out to be slightly different than I expected, right, in terms of the amount of time needed. But you're right in that if you don't strategically think about what those priorities are and set your calendar, if you will, each week, it can grab you. The sand, everything can kind of subsume you, right, in some way. And so I'm constantly reflecting on, okay, where am I spending my time? And the other part, in particular to my role, is I feel an intense desire to stay close to the people that we're serving, right? And so to me, that means being out in the field as well. And so I do prioritize being out there, seeing healthcare professionals for the therapeutic areas of the products that we provide. I was in Liverpool twice this week, 2 trains up and back on Monday and Wednesday, one for one therapeutic area, one for another. And I gain an immense amount of information, but it also just keeps you really close, such that when you then go into those other discussions, you're well informed in that sense as well. So to answer your question, sorry to go a little bit roundabout on it, but it's really to try to identify, and you need to keep it to me, 2, 3, 4 broad categories. The last bit though is, and to me the important piece, and this goes to leadership, I think, is make time for people, make time for allow enough time for impromptu conversations. If someone messages you and says, I need 10 minutes, find 10 minutes, right? If someone says, hey, will you do a podcast? Find time, on a warm summer's morning, right, on a Friday to do that, right? And so to me, those things, the accessibility of doing those things is to me a really important part of being a leader in general, right? And so that's why I do these things for sure.
Yeah, I think the people component's obviously interesting. I think there's such an important balance to find there, and I think it also, maybe at least to me, it feels like it varies a bit depending on like what your goal is, that you know, like what's the main thing that you're doing at work. If you're, let's say you're a technical expert, I think your goals, your objectives, what you're doing on a daily basis is probably a bit more defined as opposed to you're, you know, a senior leader of an organization. You've got like all these things going on, like, so like where do you put your time? So I think slightly easier here for the technical expert, more difficult for the senior leader. But again, like both obviously have to prioritize where to put and how to spend their time basically.
But I would just sorry to jump in, but I would just say, to me, it's the same thing. It's just different topics. Right? So the technical expert, you're gonna have just as many different things pulling at you from different directions. You may have one big project that you're working on, but there's probably things within that project, that are pulling at you, right? To say, do I focus here? Do I focus there? To me, it's the same thing, right? But my project is the whole affiliate, right? And so there are different things, within that. And so I do think the mechanism or the function of trying to determine and prioritize is the same. It's just different context.
That's a good point, because I guess like even as the technical expert, you could be like, how much time do you want to spend looking at that particular data set, right? Like you could spend 30 minutes.
Are you going to focus on your match adjusted indirect comparison, for 2 hours, or are you going to focus on it for 30 minutes so you can do something else, right? And so that is the art of prioritizing your time.
Yeah. And so another aspect that you touched on was the people bit, obviously. And like you mentioned, making the time for like that small conversations that when people ask you for time, you make that a priority.
Sure.
How do you create like an environment that is just overall inclusive, that feels like a place where people want to work? Like because I feel like that's so important, and like oftentimes companies get it wrong, and a lot of the time that can then lead to people leaving the company, even though they might be completely happy with like the technical aspects of their work, but if they don't feel like the people bit is there, how do you strike that balance, especially considering that different people want different things? Some people prefer working from home, others prefer the in-person stuff. Like what's the balance there, and like how do you manage that?
Well, I think the foundational piece is maybe two things. One is transparency, and the other is there's no substitute to truly caring about people. There isn't, And so I think that going into it, to me the task of becoming a leader is not one that is taken lightly, right? You're entrusted with, a really important role, right, in doing that. And in doing so, to me, you have to be all in. You have to be truly invested in the team that you're managing, and the individuals, the people, right, themselves as human beings, their lives, their families. You just truly, you need to be all in with respect to that. There's no faking that, right? You just don't, right? And so, my intent when I'm speaking to a team or whatever, what you see is that's it, right? I mean, it's intended to be transparent and connected in that way. I don't know any other way, to do it. The type of leadership style that I've evolved to over time. Because earlier on in my career, I'm a very passionate person, right? I'm a very energetic, person. I do a lot. And so, earlier on in my career, that came across as, kind of heavy, people like, okay, who is this guy, right? But to me, it's if there's a term, it's servant leadership. Okay. So it's servant leadership with accountability. So I exist, my purpose is to try to enable a team to find out what's in the way of the team achieving what it wants to achieve, and how can I help, right? How can I help them? But it's with an accountability sense as well, right? So I don't exist just to have, do things for people, right? Other people have to be accountable for that, as well, right? And so they've got to be all in, at the same time. And so that's the balance I try to strike just from a philosophical standpoint in terms of, or mentality in terms of, entering conversations. And I guess those things along with a mindset of continuous improvement. So, and I hope that the teams that are within our company or, wherever you might be working have that same approach, right? To me, it's not about, when I enter a conversation, it's not like a gotcha moment where I'm trying to figure out what's wrong and saying, you see, that's wrong. That's not it. It's the sense of, okay, what's going right? What's not going right? What are we doing well? Where do we need to improve? If we make these changes, will that make it better? Right? That's the mentality, right? Some folks feel like that means that they've done something wrong, right? When you approach, and my goal is that people don't feel that way, right? That it's truly a continuous improvement. Okay, how do we together as a team keep getting better at what we do? There are always ways to get better, right? And so that having that type of mentality in an agile type of way, I think is really important.
Yeah. You always want to, maybe that's not the right way of phrasing it, but like you almost want to encourage failure as well, like or at least opening up or creating an atmosphere where people think that they can like safely express however they think, they feel, what they believe in. And then, giving them all the support to be their best selves. I think that's just, something that you see whenever there's an environment where that's not the case and people don't feel safe. People will hold back, not, give their best contributions that they otherwise would bring to the table. So I think that's, creating that sort of like safe space, that's super important. I think.
And then building on that, if you remember our last town hall, a simple thing that we're looking to try to do is to add 2 recognition each town hall. I don't know if you recall this. One was focused on from a grassroots standpoint, what are the different ways we're leveraging AI, right? And it's to kind of democratize it so everyone can utilize it in whatever form that they can. But if people use it in a really cool way, let's recognize that. Let's throw them some gratitude points, right? But it'll create a culture of learning. The other one was best learning, right? And when we started that, you used the term failure, and I've you've heard fail fast, term before. When we were thinking about that, we actually, where I started was, well, let's have the best failure award, right? That sort of thing. And we're like, okay, maybe that's not the best way of describing it, but best learning, right? And so getting what was the key learning that someone had that's propelled them in a certain direction in a positive way? That's something to recognize. And so we're just trying, or I would just try to find ways of encouraging the very thing that you're talking about, right? And doing so in a public space, giving people, some a basic recognition for that, I think is a positive thing.
Yeah, I think the recognition bit is so important, but yet you can also do it like so wrong, because I think on the one side, everyone wants to be recognized for whatever it is that they're doing. I think that that's quite inherent to us as human beings. Mm-hmm. But then also, I think from a corporate perspective, if you're doing too much of that, you're giving too much recognition. It can almost feel like, okay, if everyone's getting recognized,
everyone gets a trophy.
Exactly. Yeah. So like, if everyone's a winner, then nobody's a winner, right? So like that sort of like mindset. So yeah, that balance there to find.
That's right.
Yeah. The other bit I think you said was about authenticity and like just genuinely caring about people to create that, inclusive, good environment where people feel like they're in a workplace that they really enjoy, they really want to be there. And I think that's so difficult because everyone, like every leader you ask will always say they care about the people. But then again, do they really? I think just like by the law of large numbers, like a certain percentage of those people will not care about the people as much. So it's then like, how do you, and I think individually, you'd probably recognize quite, if you have direct interactions with someone who like oversees a bigger team, you will feel that. Even they can say all the right things, but if it doesn't feel right, you still know they don't truly care. So I think this is where people get it wrong a lot of the time, because they say the right things, but they don't truly mean it.
Well, then that's where actions come in, my friend, right? And so to me, the most important aspect of that are the actions you take, right? So as an example, are you there for someone when they need it, right? When someone messages you and says, do you have 10 minutes today? Do you find it, right? When someone asks, will you do a podcast? Do you do it? When someone says, hey, I could use you here for this meeting, do you go, right? And so it's just maybe a simple way of saying the commitments that you make as a leader are really important. And when you commit to doing something, you honor that commitment, right? And so that it seems so simple, right? But it's so true, right? You do what you say that you're going to do. Live and model the values that you espouse to have, right? That's to me, which then gets to the whole, how do you balance it all, conversation.
You could always do more. You could always attend more meetings, be there for more people.
You have to make choices in that way. But when you commit to doing something, take that commitment very seriously, right? That's it's your, in a way, I feel like it's your integrity, on the line when you say, hey, yeah, I'm going to do something. And nothing bothers me more internally than when I say, sure, and then I forget, and then I'm constantly, looping back to say, hey, when are we going to do that again? Right. Or something like that. That's always, something that eats at you, right. In that instance.
And I think you see that at every level, don't you? I mean, isn't it, I'm not sure, like I need to validate my sources on that, but isn't it also true that Taylor Swift at some point attended a wedding of a fan and surprised her and like made the time to attend a single fan's wedding, right, just to show that like she cares about, that individual person. And like, obviously she doesn't have the time to do that for all of her millions and millions of fans, but like she still made an active decision to prioritize her time and like attend that wedding. So I think, yeah, you can like, as a leader, like you get all these little opportunities, and to a lot of them you probably have to say no, but like the ones that you say yes to, they do make an impact on the people that that they affect. And that probably then also has an effect of like people speaking positively about such experience, and that then kind of like spreads out to a wider organization.
Yeah, and the to me, the idea or the point in doing things like that is not to necessarily send a message or to make a point, right? It's to just to stay close to people and help where you can, right? When you can. In those instances, not speaking for Taylor Swift, of course, but in those instances when you do commit to go to a function or volunteer to do something or spend time, with someone, I would always venture to say that I get more out of it. It's really enjoyable. It's really, really enjoyable, right? And so, when if you have the moment to attend, just to use your example, a small wedding of two people who love each other, what's not great about that? I mean, it's like that's amazing, right? And so that's what makes those types of engagements so wonderful, right? And so it's just my way of saying that's some of the let's call it a perk of leadership, right? If you do commit yourself to it, it's extremely gratifying because you see people, you help people, you see them at their happiest, You see them when they need you the most. I mean, it's just a fantastically gratifying type of experience.
That's great. I love that. We are running slightly out of time. There's a couple of more questions that I had planned, but like too many to go through all today. I'm just, rather than picking a question myself, I just like want to throw it over to you. Like, is there anything you think is important, considering the audience of this channel, like young professionals trying to break into the industries, maybe also like people who've worked in pharma for a long time, like what's one thing you'd like to tell them? And I'd like to frame this as openly as possible to give you an opportunity to basically not say whatever you want, but like just what's some piece of like general advice that you think people should hear more of?
I think the main thing that is probably the most challenging thing for anyone is when you make mistakes. And we're all human. We're going to make mistakes, right? And to me, that a growth mindset embraces as difficult as it is, right, for high-performing people like us, to as we go through whatever it is that we're doing, you're going to make mistakes, right? And part of the continued journey that everyone is on as a leader, subject matter expert, you name it, is trying to identify and learn from those mistakes over time. So the first thing you have to do, in that context is realize that you've made a mistake, right? That's the first thing.
Difficult, isn't it? Sometimes.
It is. You can have your blinders on, for sure, right? And so then you're like, okay, but that's it. So how you to me, in that instance, you listen to feedback. People say tongue-in-cheek feedback's a gift. It truly is. Feedback given in the right way, even if it's not given in the right way, the overall message, it's a point of reflection for me at least when I receive it. Yeah. And then just recognizing that as you go through that, you're it's not an easy process. You're gonna not struggle, but you should take time to process the feedback. Try to take time to recognize the lessons that might be learned, and it also takes humility in doing that, right? As you do it, and so I find that's an important life skill. It truly is, and it's something that I think what it does is whatever you're trying to achieve, it helps you through whatever learning curve you're going through to go through that learning curve faster. And in terms of being successful at what you're doing, whatever it is that you're doing, whatever learning curves that you need to go through, and we're all on a learning curve, what makes someone successful at what they do is the speed at which they go through that learning curve. Yeah. And so it's happened to me just because I've been, gratefully dropped into several different scenarios that can be somewhat different from one another, right? Working in the US is different than working in the UK and Ireland. It's just different, right? And so that by itself is its own learning curve, right? And so I've gone through it, right? And the mentality that I have, particularly working here as an example for more than a year, is how do I speed it up? How do I speed up the learning curve? And you only do that by truly scrutinizing, okay, where am I making mistakes and what do I need to learn from them? You're invariably going to make some mistakes. The fun ones for me are the verbal ones, right? The colloquialisms that exist one place versus another. Right. I'll say something invariably that people will be like, what are you talking about? And so you're like, you have to, I'm sorry, so that, yeah, I sometimes say, does that translate? And people will be like, yeah, absolutely. And sometimes they'll be like, no, it really doesn't, Pete. And I'm like, okay, right. So then find a different way, right? But that requires you to laugh at yourself and move on, right? So I think that would be one message that I give, because it's useful at whatever point you are in your career, right? And as soon as this might be a little bit of a dramatic statement, but as soon as you stop doing that to me, you should hang up whatever you're doing. you should do something else. Because as soon as you think you figure it out, you haven't.
Yeah.
You just haven't, right? And so that is the growth mindset. You're never, you never stop learning. For me, until the day you die, to be honest. So that's
absolutely.
Yeah. But people who stop truly learning, to me, we're human beings. We're geared, to learn and to grow. And so you have to me, continually have that mindset.
I like that. I think this is a perfect place to end it. I want to say thank you again. I really appreciate it.
Of course.
I enjoyed the discussion today, and thank you so much for taking the time.
Mirko. Thank you for having me, and I wish you well in all of your future podcasts.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Appreciate it.
I'll see you.
Perfect.
Bye.